"Are you sure about this place, Mindy?" Jared asked nervously, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his sweat-beaded nose. "It seems kind of the beaten path." I shot him my most reassuring smile, though I had to admit, even I felt a tinge of trepidation as we approached the ramshackle wooden structure. The wholesome Hunter butchery stood in stark contrast to the lush, rolling hills surrounding it, a rusty omen amidst the idyllic mountain scenery. "This is exactly the kind of place I've been looking for," I insisted, trying to inject more confidence into my voice than I felt. "Don't you see, Jared? This is sustainable omnivorism in action." He frowned skeptically. "If you say so. I just get kind of a weird vibe, you know?" Ignoring his doubts, I strode up to the weathered front door, rapping my knuckles firmly against the splintered wood. Part of me could understand Jared's reservations after my meltdown and departure from the corporate rat race 2 years ago. I'd been just as cynical and jaded. But then I found my true calling using my influence and platform to spread the gospel of clean, sustainable living. Veganism, ethical farming practices, a respect and reverence for nature's balance. Well, except for the ethical omnivorism part, I admitted ruefully. Despite my impassioned preaching, some deep-rooted part of me still craved the savory, forbidden taste of meat, which was what had led us here, to this dilapidated butcher shop promising free-range, humanely raised animal protein sources. If I could just find an ethical way to indulge my cravings without compromising my principles. The door swung open with a groan of protest, and a hulking, grizzled man filled the doorway, eyeing us with open suspicion. "What do you kids want?" he growled, looking us up and down. I pasted on my most winning smile. "Good morning. My name's Mindy, and this is my friend Jared. We're interested in learning more about your operation here." The man's face split into a grin, though it didn't reach his flinty eyes. "Well, now you've come to the right place, Missy. Name's Zeke, and this here's the last truly ethical butchery around these parts." He stepped back, waving us inside with a grimy, calloused hand. "Come on in and let old Zeke show you around. Bet you've never tasted protein quite like what I got here." Jared opened his mouth, probably to protest, but I silenced him with a stern look and eagerly followed the butcher inside. The pungent, mouth-watering aroma of cured meat and wood smoke instantly enveloped us. My mouth started watering traitorously as Zeke led us past the front counter and through a heavy door into the back rooms. "See, I don't believe in none of that factory farm nonsense," the butcher growled over his shoulder. "My stock's all free-range, grass-fed, lived their whole lives roaming and grazing out in them hills. Don't get more humane than that." He stopped in front of a heavy wooden door, turning to face us with a proud grin. "And here's the pride of my operation. Go ahead, girlie. Have a taste of true ethical protein." Zeke hauled open the door, and a rich, heady scent wafted out, making my head swim. Hanging from the rafters were rows of curing meat, rich, dark jerky that made my mouth water. "What kind of meat is that?" Jared stammered, seeming to shrink back. The butcher's grin widened into something almost predatory. "See for yourself, boy." Before I could react, Zeke snatched a strip of the jerky and tossed it to me. I fumbled the catch, and the rich, smoky aroma enveloped me, beckoning me to taste. Suppressing a moan of longing, I raised the strip to my lips and took a bite. The flavor exploded over my tongue, rich and savory, with a depth of umami unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was transcendent, sublime and unmistakably, horrifyingly human flesh. I recoiled, choking and gagging, the jerky strip falling from my trembling hand. What is this?" Zeke threw his head back and laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "Told ya, girl. Only the most ethical, free-range protein around here. That's when I caught movement from the corner of my eye, more figures emerging from the shadowed back rooms, their forms seeming to shift and contort in a way that defied nature. Zeke's laughter trailed off into a guttural growl, and I watched in mute, horrified fascination as his body began to change. Coarse fur sprouted from his skin as his bones crunched and realigned with obscene pops. His face elongated into a bestial muzzle, lips peeling back to reveal row upon row of dagger-like fangs. Within moments, the hulking man was replaced by a creature of purest savagery, a werewolf straight from the most blood-curdling of nightmares. "You didn't really think we was running no ordinary butcher shop, did ya?" The beast rumbled, its words barely intelligible through that horrific maw. "We're the ultimate ethical hunters, taking our place at the top of the food chain." Jared whimpered, cowering back against the wall as more of the werewolf pack emerged, hemming us in with their grotesque, twisted forms. I tried to summon my voice to call on the same forceful, commanding presence that had earned me millions of loyal followers online. "You're monsters," I cried, my voice trembling despite my efforts. "You perverted the natural order, taken human life for your own sick desires." The werewolf Zeke threw his head back and released a peal of raucous laughter that chilled me to the bone. "And what gives you hairless apes the right to decide what's natural and what ain't? You've been domesticating and breeding cattle, pigs, chickens for generations, forcing them to live lives of confinement and slaughter for your own pleasure." The werewolf's fetid breath washed over me as he continued, lips peeling back in a sadistic leer. "We're just taking our rightful place as the apex predators, little meat. Humans have had their turn at the top of the food chain, but now it's time for a new order." Jared whimpered again, and one of the other werewolves turned its malformed, elongated muzzle towards him, nostrils flaring. "Please," my friend stammered, eyes wide with primal terror behind his smudged glasses. We didn't mean any harm. We'll leave. We'll never tell anyone about this, I swear." "Sorry, kid," Zeke growled, not sounding even remotely apologetic. "Can't have any witnesses. You've seen too much of how we operate." He straightened up, throwing his arms out in a grandiose gesture. "But don't you see? This is true ethical omnivorism at its purest. We live freely, taking only what we need from nature to survive. No factory prisons, no slaughterhouses, just the natural order of predator and prey." I felt ill at the smug righteousness in the monster's tone. All this time I had been lecturing others about respecting the natural world, living in harmony with it. But here was nature's harsh truth, laid bare a remorseless cycle of bloodshed, where we were little more than cattle. "You've been lying to yourself, princess," Zeke sneered, seemingly reading the self-doubt in my eyes. "Pretending you're not just another consumer, another link in the food chain like the rest of us animals. Well, now the food chain's come for you." With a roar that shook the very rafters, he reared back, his claws extending into wicked blades. I stumbled back, groping behind me for anything, any weapon I could use to defend myself and Jared. My fingers closed around a rusted meat hook, and I brandished it feebly before me. Zeke laughed again at my pitiful display. "You think that's gonna stop us, girl? We're the ultimate hunters, descended from the most vicious, ruthless predators nature's ever produced." One of the other werewolves took a menacing step forward, and Jared scrambled behind me with a terrified squeak. I tried to keep the makeshift weapon trained on the advancing monster, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Please," I heard myself pleading, hating how small and pathetic I sounded. "We'll do anything. Just let us go." "Can't do that," Zeke said with an approximation of remorse. "You've seen too much of our operation here. Gotta tie up all the loose ends, as they say." He gestured lazily with one massive paw, and the werewolves fanned out, cutting off any path to escape. Jared was trembling violently against my back, and I could feel my own resolve crumbling. This was it, the darkest truth I had been avoiding all along. My whole philosophy was a lie, just another way for the human animal to pretend we were above the savage realities of nature. But here they were, the apex predators to which we were merely walking meals. My ethical omnivorism had just made me the perfect, guilt-free prey. Zeke seemed to revel in my despair, taking a deep breath to savor it. "Any last words, little meat?" I opened my mouth, but what could I possibly say? Any pleas or justifications would just be more self-delusion, more arrogant posturing by a soon-to-be meal. The mighty human animal, brought low by the true inheritors of the planet. So instead, I just closed my eyes and awaited the tearing oblivion of those savage jaws. The werewolves closed in, their growls and snarls merging into a discordant chorus of bloodlust. I clutched the rusted meat hook tighter, its cold metal slick with the sweat of primal terror. This was really it, the end of the trail for Mindy Wilkins, world-renowned influencer and purported beacon of ethical, sustainable living. A harsh bark of laughter escaped my constricted throat at the bitter irony. All those years of preaching harmony with nature, of respecting the cycles of life and death, and here I was about to become just another link in the food chain. An insignificant speck snuffed out by the planet's rightful apex predators reclaiming their supremacy. Jared was trembling uncontrollably behind me, his harsh, panicked breaths hot on the back of my neck. The poor kid, he had idolized me, hung on my every word about clean living and ethical consumption. What a cruel deception to have his hero revealed as a fraud, just another self-deluded human too arrogant to accept her role as prey. "Please," he whimpered, voice barely audible over the werewolf's growls. "Mindy, I don't want to die." "Shh. It's okay." I lied, trying to keep my own voice steady, despite the yawning pit of dread consuming me from within. I wasn't afraid of death. I'd been courting it for years through my self-destructive vices and lifestyle. No, my terror came from the realization that everything I'd built my life around was a sham, a fantasy to shield myself from nature's cold indifference. Zeke, the alpha werewolf, stepped forward again, his lips peeling back in a sadistic leer to reveal those wicked, curved fangs. "You got a choice here, meat," he rumbled, each word carrying a bestial weight. "We can make it quick and merciful, or you can give us a little sport first before we gut you." My gaze flicked desperately around the dingy butcher room, sizing up any potential avenues of escape. But the werewolf pack had us surrounded, cutting off any exit. We were trapped like rats in their lair, about to become the latest additions to their sick ethical meat locker. "You just don't get it, do you?" Zeke sneered, seemingly reading the defiance in my eyes. "This was never your choice to make. You don't get to decide how the food chain operates, girly. That's the whole arrogance of your kind, thinking you get to pick and choose what's ethical or not." He stalked closer, each heavy footfall shaking the rickety wooden floor. "Well, now it's our turn at the top. The werewolves are the new apex predators, and you humans are just our free-range livestock." One of the other beasts loped forward, its lolling tongue and glittering fangs glistening with ropes of drool. Jared scrambled back with a terrified squeak, nearly tripping over an abandoned meat grinder in his desperation to escape. "We've been watching you for a while now, Mindy," Zeke continued in that infuriatingly smug tone. "Seeing how you preach all that sustainable and ethical crap to your little followers. You're the perfect mascot for our new world order." He threw his head back and released a peal of raucous laughter that sent chills down my spine. "Just think of the irony, girl. You finally found your ethical free-range meat source, and it was your own kind all along." The werewolves joined in the mocking laughter, their bestial chuckles intermingling into a nightmarish chorus. I grasped the meat hook tighter, the cheap metal digging into my sweaty palms. This couldn't be how it ended, not as some cosmic joke perpetrated by these sadistic monsters. Anger and defiance surged through me, burning away the last tendrils of self-doubt and despair. I was Mindy Wilkins, god damn it. A woman who had clawed her way out of the depths of depression and burnout to become a leading voice for a whole movement. These beasts could take my life, but they'd never break my spirit. You think you've won, I spat, glaring directly into Zeke's pitiless yellow eyes. That you're so righteous for being at the top of your twisted food chain. You're nothing but animals, savages ruled by your most base, grotesque urges. Jared made a small noise of surprise behind me, but I pressed on, every word fueled by a lifetime of hard-won self-belief. I gave people a vision of a better way of living in balance with nature and sustainability, and you've perverted that into this depraved, cannibalistic butchery. Zeke's muzzle contorted in an approximation of a grin. There's that famous self-righteousness, always thinking you humans are so superior, so elevated from the natural order. We are, I shouted, brandishing the hook in a defiant arc. We can choose to be more than just unthinking beasts. We can make ethical choices, build societies, create art and philosophy. The werewolf snorted derisively. And look what that got you, trapped like a rat, about to get torn apart and served up as our latest delicacy. You haven't won, I hissed through gritted teeth. You'll never win. Because for every one of you sick, twisted aberrations, there are millions of humans who choose to be something better. In a flash of movement, I lashed out with the hook, aiming right for Zeke's exposed jugular. But the alpha was too fast. He caught my wrist in one massive paw, his claws digging into my flesh and making me cry out in pain. Nice try, he growled, wrenching the makeshift weapon from my grasp and tossing it aside with contemptuous ease. But you just can't help being prey, can you? With his free paw, Zeke raked a set of deep gouges across my cheek, sending searing lances of agony through me. I stumbled back, gasping, the metallic tang of blood filling my mouth. Don't worry, sweetheart. The werewolf leered, flexing his hooked talons. We're going to take our time with you. Make an example out of the great Mindy Wilkins to show the rest of your kind their proper place. The other werewolves closed in, their rancid breath hot and fed in my face as they herded me back against the wall. Jared was cowering in the corner, hands over his face as he wept in abject terror. This was really it then. Despite my bravado, my final defiant act as a representative of humanity, I was about to be brutally slaughtered like a dumb animal. My eyes stung with tears as I looked at my friend one last time, a reminder of all the lies I'd been telling myself and my followers under the guise of ethical omnivorism. I'm sorry, Jared, I whispered, the words catching in my bloodied throat. I'm so sorry. Oh. Then the werewolves were on me, and all I knew was blinding, white-hot agony as their fangs and claws began to tear into my helpless flesh. 2 weeks later. Officer Mara Kozlowski squinted against the harsh glare of the setting sun as she crouched beside the disturbed patch of earth. Her partner, Deputy Caleb Rhodes, scanned the dense tree line with narrowed eyes. You getting anything useful over there, Mara? He called out gruffly. She frowned, brushing some loose soil aside with a gloved hand. Hard to say. Definitely signs of a struggle. That's a lot of displaced ground cover and broken branches. Rising to her feet, Mara surveyed the small clearing, taking in the bent foliage and matted areas of trampled grass. Her gut told her this wasn't just another hiker who'd gotten turned around on the trails. Not with the rash of mysterious disappearances they'd been looking into lately. Maybe we should call in some extra hands, Caleb suggested, running a hand over his buzz cut. Bring in the search and rescue dogs, see if they can pick up a trail before it goes completely cold. Mara nodded slowly. As much as she wanted to stay objective, something about this case was setting her on edge in a way she couldn't quite articulate. A heaviness in the air, an almost primal sense of wrong that made the hairs on her neck prickle. Let's get a team out here first thing tomorrow at sunup, she decided. I want to comb every inch of this area. As they headed back towards their patrol truck, Mara couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were dealing with something far more sinister than just your average wilderness disappearance. Little did she know just how close to the truth she was. The next morning, a full search and rescue team had assembled near the trailhead, a motley assortment of deputies, forest rangers, and volunteer park guides. Mara watched as the K9 unit handlers released their dogs, the well-trained animals immediately catching a scent and straining against their leashes. "All right, listen up," she called out, raising her voice to be heard over the din. "We've got a lot of ground to cover today, and we need to move fast before any trail goes completely cold. Let's try and stay in pairs at minimum and check in every 20 minutes. The teams dispersed into the dense forest with a crunch of boots on the loamy soil, the dogs quickly taking the lead as they followed the invisible tracks and scent trails. Mara fell in beside Caleb, the two of them following the path of one of the K9 units. The woods were eerily still, the usual chatter of birds and scurrying wildlife conspicuously absent. Even the breeze seemed to have fallen into an unnatural hush, as if the entire forest was holding its breath in anticipation. "You feel that?" Caleb muttered under his breath. "Something ain't right here." Mara gave a terse nod, her hand straying unconsciously to rest on the butt of her service pistol. "I know what you mean. It's like the whole damn place just went quiet." They trekked on in tense silence, following the K9 unit as it wove a winding path through the undergrowth. The dog seemed to be tracking a definite trail now, its nose nearly brushing the forest floor as it followed some invisible spoor. Then, all at once, it stopped dead in its tracks, letting out a single, hair-raising bark of alarm that shattered the stillness. The handler quickly moved to restrain the animal as it began growling and straining against its leash, hackles raised. "Easy, girl, easy," the handler shouted over the dog's escalating snarls. "What is it? What have you got?" Mara and Caleb exchanged a wary glance before cautiously approaching, their hands hovering near their holstered sidearms. The growling K9 had its muzzle pointed directly at the base of a gnarled old oak, its teeth bared in an unmistakable display of aggression and fear. "Hey, take it easy there, Rufus," the handler said in a gentler tone, though his own expression was one of growing trepidation. "You smell something?" Rufus responded with another reverberating growl, his entire body tensed as if ready to attack at any moment. Caleb took a careful step forward, peering at the base of the tree with a furrowed brow. "You seen what I'm seeing?" he muttered, nodding towards a dark crevice in the trunk. Mara followed his gaze, her breath catching in her throat. There, amidst the twisted roots and fallen leaves, was a scattering of what appeared to be bones. Human bones. She swallowed hard, the hair on the back of her neck standing on end as a wave of cold dread washed over her. This was no ordinary missing persons case. They had stumbled across something far, far worse. "Kozlowski to all units," she barked into her radio, her voice terse and professional despite her inner unease. "We've got a possible crime scene here. I need medevac and forensics teams deployed to our coordinates immediately." As the radio crackled with acknowledgments, Mara stared at the grisly remains, her mind racing. What sick, depraved individual could be responsible for something like this? And more importantly, were they prepared to confront the inhuman evil that seemed to have taken root in these woods? Only one thing was certain: whatever was lurking out there in the shadowed depths of the forest, it was far from human, and it was undoubtedly hungry for more. The forensics team arrived within the hour, swarming the small clearing with an array of equipment and personnel in sterile hazmat suits. Mara stood back with Caleb, watching grimly as the specialists meticulously collected every scrap of evidence from the grisly scene. "I've never seen anything like this," Caleb muttered, his expression one of barely concealed revulsion. "Not in all my years on the force." Mara could only nod, her throat too tight with dread to formulate a response. She'd witnessed her fair share of disturbing crime scenes, but there was something uniquely unsettling about this one, an almost preternatural wrongness that set her very instincts on edge. One of the forensics techs emerged from the cluster, stripping off her soiled hazmat suit with brisk, economical movements. "We've got enough material samples to start a comprehensive analysis," she stated flatly. "But I can give you the broad strokes right now." She fixed Mara with a grave stare. "Those were definitely human remains. We found bone fragments and other biological matter. And based on the disposal pattern, it looks like they were being consumed." A leaden silence fell over the clearing, the gravity of the tech's words hanging in the air like a miasma. Caleb was the first to find his voice. "You're telling me we got some kind of cannibalistic psycho out here in the woods?" he asked hoarsely. The tech shook her head, mouth set in a grim line. "I'm not ruling anything out at this stage. But those remains, they didn't seem consistent with human consumption patterns, more like animal predation." A chill ran down Mara's spine at those words. She opened her mouth, but before she could respond, a panicked shout echoed through the trees. "Officer down, officer down. We need medical over here now." Her blood turned to ice in her veins. Without a moment's hesitation, Mara took off in a dead sprint towards the commotion, Caleb hot on her heels. They tore through the underbrush, heedless of the branches whipping their faces, following the sounds of chaos and distress. What awaited them in the next clearing would forever scar itself into their memories. One of the deputies, a kid fresh out of the academy named Jameson, was sprawled in an ever-widening pool of his own blood. His uniform had been shredded to rags, deep gouges carved into his flesh by what looked like claws. Inhuman claws far too large to be from any natural predator. The rest of his search team huddled together a few yards away, their expressions ones of abject terror as they trained their weapons on something just out of view. "Easy, easy," one of the rangers was shouting in a tremulous voice. "We don't want any more trouble. Just back off, and we'll let you go." A deep, reverberating growl rolled through the clearing like a thunderclap. Mara slowly rounded the cluster of armed officers, her breath catching in her throat at the sight that awaited her. Crouched in an feral, predatory stance amidst the trampled foliage was a monster. There was no other word for it. The creature was vaguely humanoid in shape, covered in coarse, matted fur and standing nearly 8 feet tall on its trunk-like digitigrade legs. Its elongated muzzle was a nightmarish tangle of fangs and drool, pulled back in a bestial snarl of rage. But worst of all were the eyes, twin orbs of malign, inhuman intelligence that bored into Mara with primal, hungry focus. "What in the hell?" Caleb rasped from behind her, his voice nearly inaudible. The werewolf, for there was no other name for such an abomination against nature, seemed to find some dark amusement in their shock and revulsion. Its grotesque maw parted in a sadistic approximation of a grin, revealing rows of serrated fangs. "You hairless apes just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" The creature rumbled, its words nearly indistinguishable through the guttural growls and snarls. "Had to come sticking your noses where they don't belong." It rose to its full, towering height, those wickedly hooked claws flexing as if eager to continue its bloody work. The officers instinctively raised their weapons, though their expressions betrayed the fact that they knew such paltry human firearms would be useless against this monster. "You're trespassing on our territory now, pigskins," the werewolf continued, taking a slow, sauntering step forward. "And the fee for that is a heavy toll of flesh and bone." With a spine-chilling roar, more shapes began to emerge from the shadowed tree line, a veritable pack of the slavering, misshapen beasts. They fanned out in a loose semicircle, cutting off any chance of retreat or escape for the beleaguered officers. Mara felt her pistol grip slick with sweat in her trembling hand. They were trapped, surrounded by these unnatural horrors with no chance of backup or reinforcements. Her mind raced, trying in vain to formulate some plan, some desperate gambit to get them out of this alive. But as the werewolf pack closed in with an eagerness that spoke of deep, ingrained savagery, Mara knew the terrible truth. They had stumbled into a primal, remorseless world ruled by fang and claw, where humans were regarded as nothing more than prey. And in the depths of those pitiless, inhuman eyes, she saw the cold, inescapable reality. They were all already dead. As the first werewolf launched itself forward with a keening battle cry, Mara's world exploded into a maelstrom of gunfire, shrieks, and the endless, merciless darkness of fangs and slaughter. The gunfire and screams slowly faded into an eerie, oppressive silence that seemed to swallow the entire forest. Mara came back to consciousness, surrounded by the copper tang of blood and the reek of pierced entrails. She forced her battered body into a sitting position, gasping at the white-hot lances of agony that lanced through her. Miraculously, she was still alive, though her uniform hung in bloody tatters and deep gouges scored her flesh. All around her lay the ravaged bodies of the search team, torn asunder and strewn about like broken dolls. Poor Caleb was barely recognizable, his features a ruined mask of gore and splintered bone. Mara squeezed her eyes shut, swallowing hard against the wave of nausea and horror that threatened to overwhelm her. She was the sole survivor of this massacre, spared for some unknown, cruel purpose by the werewolf pack. A harsh, gravelly chuckle made her eyes snap open again. There, emerging from the tree line with a nonchalant swagger, was the alpha werewolf who had led the slaughter. Up close, its grotesque features were even more twisted and malformed, a perverse insult to the natural order. "Awake at last, I see." The creature rumbled in that guttural tone that sent ice through Mara's veins. "You're a tough one for a scrawny little meat creature." It crouched before her, those pitiless yellow eyes boring into her with sadistic amusement. "Can't say the same for your friends, though. My pack got a little overexcited with their prey." Mara tried to summon a defiant response, some show of bravado in the face of this nightmare-given flesh. But the words wouldn't come, strangled by the sheer weight of primal terror and revulsion that gripped her soul. The werewolf seemed to relish her despair, letting out a low, rumbling chuckle that made her want to claw her own ears off. "Don't worry, little piggy. We've got special plans for you." With a flick of its massive paw, it indicated the surrounding forest. "You're just the latest trespassers to stumble into our territory uninvited. We've been dealing with those interferent two-leggers for far too long now." Despite herself, Mara felt a tiny flicker of curiosity amidst the miasma of dread and horror. "What others?" The beast's muzzle contorted into a grotesque, fanged mockery of a grin. "Why, the ones who first led you pigskins to start sniffing around our operation, of course." It leaned in uncomfortably close, that rancid carnivore breath hot and fetid on Mara's face. The pretty little social media princess, and her adoring little fanboy, Mindy, and Jared, the missing hikers whose strange disappearance had first set this whole ill-fated investigation into motion. Mara's stomach turned to lead as the horrific realization set in. You monsters killed them," she rasped, tears of rage and anguish stinging her eyes. The werewolf threw back its head and released a peal of raucous, mocking laughter that chilled Mara to her very core. "Killed them?" it growled once its sadistic mirth subsided. "Now why would we go and do a thing like that?" It rose again to its full, towering height, those hooked talons flexing as it regarded her with an expression of dark, predatory hunger. "Can't just go wasting good, fresh meat like that, now can we?" As the full, inescapable meaning of its words crashed over her in a wave of soul-rending horror and revulsion, Mara could only let out a single, piteous wail of anguished despair. For she had finally grasped the terrible, cannibalistic truth of the werewolf pack's operation and her own newly cemented role as their latest intended livestock.